Now that we've worked with the most basic concept of Photoshop, we're going to create a project that will teach us how to use the toolbar, or at least the main functions of it. Carry along with me in this lesson. First thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new document. I'm not going to change any of the settings because the settings from our last project are perfectly fine. I could rename it, but for the purposes of this lesson I'm just going to leave it as it is. Hit OK. Now, because all we're going to do at the moment is we're going to use the toolbar, we're not going to save it or try and do anything funky with it. We're going to leave it on an artboard because there's no real reason to take it off of one. So the first thing we're going to do is create a new layer by going to the layer options, new layer. Again, I'm just going to hit OK here. Now we're going to use the rectangular marquee tool, the select tool, and we're going to select a section. Your choice how to do it, any size is fine. I've chosen this size. Now we're going to select the Paintbrush tool. I've got a colour selected already. My brush is enormous, so I'm going to decrease the size of it by using a square bracket tool, left square bracket, just to decrease the size of my brush. My opacity and my flow are okay. And I'm going to paint. Now what you can see is happening is that it's only painting in the selection I've made inside the layer, which is an extremely handy tool if I just wanted to work over a very small area without affecting the rest of the image. Now we're going to select another area, one inside that overlaps this selection, and we're going to select the erase tool, which is here above the gradient fill tool, and we're going to erase a section. Now you notice that that has now erased that small section of the painted area that I'd created, which has created this Tetris block shape, for want of a better way of putting it. And that's all on one layer, so if I was to select the move tool, I can move that around and it'll stay exactly where it is. Now we're going to create another new layer, and we're going to repeat the process, but this time we're going to use the Polygonal Lasso Tool. So if you right click on this Lasso Tool button here, you've got three types. You've got the Lasso Tool, which is a tool that allows you to do freehand selections like this, and then you've got the Polygonal Lasso Tool, which allows you to draw straight lines from point to point until you've completed the shape, more or less. There we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the square tool. There we go. Just selecting nothing. Now I'm going to create a shape, a random shape. It doesn't honestly matter what shape I make it. There we go. And that's my selection. And I'm going to paint over the top of that in a new colour. So I'm going to select my paintbrush. I'm going to choose a new colour. I'm going to go with green this time, and then I'm going to paint over the top of that. Excellent. Now I'm going to, in fact I'm going to show you how to do this the other way. If you go to select, deselect, you can also press Command or Control D. Now if I use the move tool on this section, you'll notice that it's moving that layer and not the layer below it, so I can move this shape independent of the previous shape, which is very handy. So that's that. Now I don't like the background. I think the background's quite boring, so I'm going to go back to my background layer, the layers tab down here. I'm going to create a new layer, and you'll notice that it creates it above the layer that I have selected, so it's still underneath these other two layers. I'm going to use the gradient fill tool. I'm going to choose a different gradient, one with a bit of colour in it. I'm going to use purple and yellow, and then I'm going to drag from one corner of the document to the other, and there we go. That's created a nice funky looking background. Now I'm going to select the top layer again. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to use the text tool. So here we are, it looks like a T, and in the left hand side here I'm going to select a font. Doesn't matter which font you want, you just type in the name of it and it'll come up with the closest matched option. You don't have to type it in, you can just use the drop down menu and choose which font you want. Now I'm going to create some text. That font's quite large. Now if you click on the two T's, I'm going to type something. Hello. And now if you select the text, if you want to change the size of the font so that you can actually see what the end text is going to look, if you hold your mouse over the T's there next to the font size, you can see little arrows appear by the side of the mouse. That means if you see a control with that option that pops up, if you click and hold, you can slide the mouse left or right and it will change it in real time so that you can see how it's going to look. I'm also going to change the color of the text because yellow on yellow doesn't really work. I'm going to go with blue text. Fantastic. Now I'm going to go back to the move tool and I can move that text around because text automatically creates a layer for itself. If I wanted to re-edit that text, I'd double click on the little icon with a T in it inside the layers panel and it brings up all the options again, and then you just simply hit click to say I'm done, I'm happy. Fantastic. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to create another new layer as so, and we're going to use the rectangular shapes tool. If you right click on this shape here, you've got different options. You've got a rectangle, a rounded rectangle, an ellipse, a polygon tool, a line tool, and a custom shape tool. The custom shape tool works exactly like the polygonal lasso tool, only it fills the shape that you draw. We're just going to go for a rounded rectangle tool. We're on a new layer already, so I'm simply going to drag this over like so. Now there are options for this. You can change the size of the stroke, the size of the line, you can change the color of the fill and the color of the outline. You can also change the dimensions of the rectangle by text. If you know the exact pixel size of the rectangle that you want, you can put those in here. And lastly is the radius, the size of the corners. You can drag those up and down and it will change the size of the corners. It will only do it on a new shape, that one. So now if I were to change it, you see the size of the corners are significantly larger, and it's created a new shape or a new layer automatically for me. So if I don't like it, I can just press the delete key and it's gone. So I'm quite happy with that square there, that's fine, but I don't like the fact that it's covering everything else up. So I'm going to click and drag in the layers tab, bring it down to just above our background layer, and there you go. Now if I select nothing, you can see we're getting quite a funky little image going on here. It's looking pretty amusing. The last thing that we're going to cover in this video is the clone stamp tool. We're going to cover the basics of this now because later on in the course we're going to be covering that in more advanced, but knowing the basics of how these tools work now can be very helpful. So I'm going to select the top layer, which is now the text layer, and I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to select the clone stamp tool, which looks like this rubber stamp button here. Fantastic. Now at the very top you need to check that it says sample all layers, because if you haven't used this tool before it probably won't say sample all layers. So drop that down, make sure that it doesn't say current or current and below, make sure it says all layers. I'm now going to increase the size of my brush slightly. Oh, I have to select off that menu. Yep, there we go, thank you. There we go. I want it to be a reasonable size tool. Now, what a clone stamp tool does is it selects an area of the screen which you choose, and then it will allow you to paint a copy of that area, a clone of that area, somewhere else on the picture. And you might be thinking you're not entirely sure what benefit that's going to have, but let me show you. So for example, we want this rectangle's edge to be slightly higher. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the Alt key and I'm going to click there. What Alt does is tells the program where to sample from. Now I'm going to click and I'm going to drag across, and you'll notice that it's now moved that edge, it's now cloned that edge, and I can keep going on there because it follows the mouse. The area you've sampled follows the mouse. So if I wanted to do more, because I've now created more I can just keep going, I can keep sampling that, and I'll almost completely now remove this corner up here apart from this scruffy edge, which we can remove because we've created a new layer. We can go up and select our erase tool, shrink it down to a reasonable size, and we can erase the excess that we don't want, so that we've got a fairly tidy looking edge. So we can get rid of this image, this another way. We can use our paintbrush tool, because we've already got the correct colour selected. Make our brush nice and small, and then just simply paint over that area. And there we go, that's that done.